Hi, this is Paul, and this is Rough Draft for Sunday, where I run through the current edition of my Sunday sermon. I should continue to emphasize that this is a rough draft, and what I post on Saturdays is a rough draft, and the sermons, especially the last few months, have changed quite a bit between Friday and Sunday. That's sort of normal. I let the sermon rest for a day, and then I come back to it early Sunday morning, and sometimes there's things I don't like about the sermon at all, and they're usually quite unfinished. So why do I post them on my YouTube channel? Well, I get to have you all chew on them, and actually on Saturday I usually look at your comments, and often based on the comments I adjust the sermon. And I think I actually like that as a part of a sermon process, because I can get feedback before, in a sense, I go to the final cut, even though 10 times more people see the rough draft than see the final cut. But that's the way it is right now. Was the U.S. election stolen? Who do you believe? Who do you listen to? In a lot of ways, what people think of the election has a great deal to do with what news sources they're listening to, and who do they believe, and what do they think. Now, right after the election, President Donald Trump, now former President Donald Trump, filed all sorts of lawsuits with his lawyers, 86 lawsuits contesting the election. They all went down to defeat. And so, in fact, Joe Biden was inaugurated and took the oath of office, and is now President of the United States. Now, Jordan Peterson is back on the air after a year's bout with illness. And he had a very interesting conversation with Douglas Murray, where you had a British citizen and a Canadian citizen debating U.S. politics, which is rather funny. And they're both sort of trying to come to grips with this thing. If this really was a grand conspiracy, then it seems that most of the Republican Party was in on the conspiracy. Jordan Peterson made the comment, "I don't believe for a moment that Republican-nominated judiciary members have been corrupted by left-wing propaganda to the point where they overthrew the American election." That conspiracy would have had to include Mike Pence and Mitch McConnell as well. And again, there are many people who believe that. And even just mentioning it in this sermon, I know is going to touch off a flurry of comments from one side and the other. I want to bring back this news story from a few years ago of this man in India who constructed a life-size statue of Donald Trump and called it his God. And, because I want to take a look and compare and contrast Donald Trump with Jesus. Now, I know I have probably triggered both sides with this, but triggered you shall be. How were Donald Trump and Jesus alike and not alike? They both caused a fair amount of division amongst their people. Masses of people looked at them and tried to figure them out. They divided a nation. Jesus' division of a nation was quite interesting, because at the beginning of his ministry, you see these mobs of people wanting him to do miracles, wanting bread and fish from loaves, wanting Jesus. Last week we talked about Jesus as sort of a fish finder for Peter, but Peter didn't stay that way. And so this question arises, how could Jesus upset so many people and satisfy so many people, and to the point that, in fact, they killed him? For those who are skeptical about Jesus, the points of history that are pretty much beyond contention are that this man lived and was crucified by the Romans. And his disciples claim that, he rose again from the dead, but people will split on that decision, but he was killed by the Romans. And whereas we know of a number of Jewish rebellions in the first century and in the early second century, and we know the names and the participants of such, we have no record of Jesus starting an insurrection. He was known as a miracle worker and then killed by the Romans. Why would the Romans kill a miracle worker, or purported miracle worker? And last week we heard the story of Jesus in Nazareth. Why would people, including people from his hometown, or 2 weeks ago, be ready to kill him? This is a strange story. Now, Was Jesus just a fish finder? Well, Peter didn't think so, because when Jesus inaugurated this catch of fish in the middle of the day, Peter says, "Depart from me, I'm a sinful man." And Jesus says, we'll deal with that. And so now the stories continue in the Gospel of Luke. While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell down with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. Then Jesus ordered him, "Don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for you for your cleansing, as a testimony to them." Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. And so Jesus' popularity, at least at this point in his ministry, was skyrocketing. Everybody wanted a piece of him. Everybody wanted him to be Miracle Max or a fish finder or whatever they needed fixing in their life. They wanted Jesus to take care of it. And so he's massively popular. But his popularity was going to cause him trouble with certain groups of people. The next story. After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. "Follow me," Jesus said to him, and Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house. Now, Levi is a tax collector. Levi is working with the group of people who are collaborating with the Roman Empire and those who are basically being their puppets locally. And so Levi, also known as Matthew, was located in a very specific place in the Judean Culture War. And the reason he could invite Jesus to a great banquet is because he probably had a lot of money, and he had gotten that money because any occupying army knows if you actually want to draw taxes from the people you are occupying, you need local collaborators to get in there because they know where the money is and to get the money out of the people. Romans didn't pay taxes. The people that they conquered did. That is how Rome worked. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples because, hey, Jesus, you're eating, and table fellowship was a very big deal. You don't share the table with your enemies. You don't share the table with the enemies of the people of God. And so they complain. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and with sinners?" Jesus answered them, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners to repentance." So already we begin to see the tension between Jesus and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Now, the Judean Culture War in the first century was not that difficult for us to conceptualize. You have a pagan Roman occupation that is contaminating the people of God and their land. Now, basically, the variety of menu options to understand this is pretty much set. You can collaborate. Herod and the aristocracy, tax collectors, soldiers, prostitutes, they're all collaborators. And so Levi is on that side of the culture war. You can avoid and stay pure. This is basically a bunker mentality like the Essenes. Go out into the caves and the deserts. As John the Baptist said, flee from the coming judgment. Go out and devote yourself to prayer and holiness and wait for God to destroy the Romans and all of those wobbly Jews who are collaborating with them. There's another group in the Judean Culture War. Another group wants violent resistance. The only good Roman is a dead Roman, and all of those who collaborate with the Romans, they were called zealots. Why? Because they were zealous for the purity of God's people. And their mascot is Phinehas in Numbers 25, and he's willing to kill for national purity. That's who the zealots were. And then there was probably the most pragmatic religious group known as the Pharisees. And other groups that were around them. And they basically understood they had to live in the world but not be of it. And they wanted to resist the Romans. And so they pretty much resisted by a lot of cultural aspects. And so when Jesus goes to eat at the house of Levi, they're going to complain because they're basically policing the boundaries and saying, Jesus, you shouldn't be with these people. You shouldn't associate with these people. You have to keep up our side in resisting the Romans. there's a lot of evidence that this was a very big deal in the first century. Although one can locate references to Sabbath observance throughout Israel's history, Sabbath observance increased in its importance during the period of the Second Temple. This is during Jesus' life, along with circumcision and dietary restrictions. It helped to nourish Jewish identity. Indeed, in addition to evidence for the strict interpretation of the Sabbath from Jewish sources, one can also refer to non-Jewish comments on Jewish Sabbath observance, with both demarking the keeping of the Sabbath as a characteristic marker of Jewish identity. They're trying to keep the family together. They're trying to draw a line. They're trying to say, if you're a good Jew, this is what you do. You keep the Sabbath. You keep the diet. You get your son circumcised. There's the box. This is how we fight the Romans. Not with knives, not out in the desert. This is how we resist until God comes and vindicates our cause. What's more, the role of Sabbath observance from the maintenance of group boundaries and as an emblem of group solidarity is evidence with the two accounts that we'll be reading in a minute. For in both particular interpretation, the Sabbath regulation against work is simply assumed, never argued. And a necessary implication of both accounts, confrontation, is that the legitimacy of this particular interpretation of the relatively vague Old Testament law, there are the text, had achieved the status of conventional wisdom. In other words, everybody knew you should not eat with Levi. Everybody knew you should not glean grains as you're going through on the Sabbath. Everybody knew you shouldn't heal on the Sabbath day. They said to Jesus, the Pharisees and teachers of the law, John's disciples fast and pray. So do the disciples of the Pharisees. But yours go on eating and drinking. You're at the party of Levi. Aren't you a libertine? Jesus answered, can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? Bridegroom? What do you mean, Jesus? But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. In those days they will fast. He told them in this parable, no one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise they will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new will match the old. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise the new wine will burst the skins, and the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, new wine must be poured into new wineskins, because they're elastic and the fermentation can happen. And no one drinking old wine wants the new, for they say the old is better. One Sabbath day, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands and eating the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Now again, it's a little bit of a gray area, but they're policing identity boundaries here. They're maintaining purity. They're trying to get everyone in the country, especially Jesus, because now he's famous. They want him to be on their side, so they're policing the boundaries. Jesus answered to them, have you never read what Jesus did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what was lawful only for the priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus associates himself with the Son of Man figure from Daniel 7. And Jesus declares himself, basically, the Lord of the Sabbath. How must this have sounded to them? We're beginning to see why so much anger and violence. On another Sabbath day, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, get up and stand in front of them. So he got up and stood there. Jesus is provoking them. Jesus could have done it the day before. Jesus could have done it the day after. Jesus sees them there, knows what they're thinking, and in order, it seems, to make a point, decides, oh yeah, anybody need some healing? Let's do it now in front of them. Why? What is Jesus saying? Jesus, the conspiracy theories around Donald Trump are that only Donald Trump kind of understands what's going on and everybody else doesn't. Well, it seems only Jesus seems to understand what's going on here, and nobody else does. And the kinds of claims he's making for himself, it's only reasonable why they wanted to put him to death. Then Jesus said to them, I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? He looked around at them all and then said to the man, stretch out your hand. So he did, and his hand was completely restored. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious. Not only is Jesus making these claims, but he's doing so and making himself popular, so popular to actually move against him would be dangerous for them. Jesus picked this fight. Jesus provoked this. And they began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus, and they'd have to move carefully because he's too powerful to move against. Well, we've seen some of that in the Republican Party, haven't we? I mean, it seems that a good many senators and people in the House, they've been afraid to move against Trump for a very long time. Now, I know I'm triggering some of you because you're saying, you're comparing Jesus and Trump. Yeah, I am. Does that mean you think Trump is like Jesus? Think about their culture war. Now, everybody had their sides, everybody had their chairs, and then there was Jesus. And nobody quite knew what to do with him. And in some ways, Jesus is sort of caught between John the Baptist and the Pharisees. And in fact, Jesus is sometimes mostly opposed, but after we learn in the book of Acts that a lot of Pharisees sort of went over to Team Jesus, because in many ways he's closest to them, because he's not out in a cave, and he's not knifing Romans, and he's not collaborating with the Romans. And so they just don't know how to locate him. But they do want to get rid of him, because if you're not an asset, you're a liability. And Jesus and his fame, well, pretty soon everyone would see him as a liability, because he doesn't seem to be lining up on anybody else's side. One of those days, Jesus went to a mountainside to pray. Remember, this is what he did to get away from the crowds, to be with his Father. And so he spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Levi. Would Jesus have a tax collector in his inner circle? We saw Peter and Andrew and James and John. These seem to be middle-class fishermen who decide that, well, they've got bigger fish to fry than have Jesus as a fish finder, and they're following him. And they were sort of radicalized by John the Baptist a bit and followed him, and then went over to Jesus. And you'd include a tax collector in your group? Well, doesn't that make you soft on Romans? Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon, who was called the Zealot. How can you have a tax collector and a zealot and people who are associated with, those who were sympathetic to going out into the desert to pray, and probably people who are close to... How could you have all of the different conflicting, warring parts of the culture war on your team, Jesus? Why would you have these people be your representatives? Well, Jesus is going to utterly change the culture war. And he's going to do it with his life. Now, we live in very conflicting times. We listen to the news, but depending on which news source you listen to, you think, well, I'm not sure what to believe. Medical experts can't agree on whether or not pregnant women should take the COVID vaccine. 65% of nursing homes say they will be forced to close within the year. Well, why? Well, China disputed coronavirus theory has shoppers stunned, shunning foreign foods. I mean, we just absolutely don't know what to do. We don't know what to believe. Well, that happens in a culture war. So is the Roman way the best way? Should we go out into the desert and stay uncontaminated from the world and stay pure and just wait for God to smite the evildoers and their collaborators and those who are wobbly? Should we be pragmatic and practical and live in the society, but in all sorts of private ways sort of keep pure and keep kosher and try to resist the evil that is among us and wait for God to rescue us? Or should we rise up in arms and storm the Capitol and destroy the government and end the patriarchy and? How are you supposed to know how to live? What Jesus does here is embody Sabbath in himself, and he makes claims that are above the culture war. In fact, he makes the kinds of claims that, unless people have really strong evidence that they are not crazy, these claims should make us stop and really look and wonder. And that's exactly what they did. He knew his mission would cost him, and he knew his mission would cost him his life. And so he disrupts their culture war, and he does so at the cost of his life. And it will look like he's a loser. It'll look like he loses big time. And then Easter will come. And somehow his followers gain boldness because they believe that, well, lives can be laid down, but not with blood and with swords and with all of these things, but in love for their neighbor. And, well, this won't be anything that happens right now or this year or even in 10 and 20 years. Jesus will conquer the Roman Empire. It'll take him 200 plus years. Who thinks on terms like this? Who colonizes the world like that? His way will grow slowly, patiently, one fish at a time. Now, we all have to figure out how to make our way in the world, and I don't really much care who you voted for, because we're going to get lots of things wrong in terms of who to believe and what to believe and who's right and who's wrong. And I would suggest that if you're going to follow someone, that you follow Jesus, and that you not only follow Jesus, but you learn the way of Jesus, because it's right there in these stories. And we all do it badly, and we all get it wrong, but there will always be tribes, as there are now, and there will always be convergent and divergent ways of thinking, as they are now. And so what you really have to find is the Good Shepherd. Well, who is the Good Shepherd? The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. This is from the Gospel of John. Therefore Jesus said to them, Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man rushes away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the Good Shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. I lay down my life for the sheep.